Hey YouTube, welcome. So in the previous video we looked at the various minis in the collection, and at the time I was heavily leaning towards this, starting with this Bloodbowl Ogre for a variety of reasons. Two models, had some good detail to practice some shading, etc. I'm going to use a variety of techniques here, but as it's the first video, I'm generally going to follow the basic recipe. Painting 101 if you will. Base coat, wash to darken the recesses, and then layer up and highlight. First, going to start with some Citadel Abaddon black on the base coat of the boots, just because I know that while it's drying I can paint other areas. I'm probably going to highlight with another colour that I'm using later anyway, so going to add some water to the paint so that it paints on smoothly, doesn't clog up any of the detail. Some colours go on better than others, but yeah, this Abaddon black's quite nice to paint with actually. It's smooth, good coverage, but if you're not getting the coverage you want, then yeah, just let it dry and give it another coat. As I'm painting this, I'm already thinking about the next step. Black's as dark as it gets, so there's no real need for a wash in the shadows, but I can just build up the highlights on the raised edges. But I already know that I want to do the white tunic and the metal areas with a dry brush. Now, dry brushing can be a bit, it can get a bit of overspill into surrounding areas. So I don't really want to mess anything else up that I've already painted. So I plan to do those areas next. Metal areas, I'm going to base with this lead belcher from Citadel. At this stage, I did have in my mind that all these metal pieces, I was just going to do a steel color, which is why I'm doing this. But having literally just done it, I then kind of changed my mind and decided I wanted to include some team colors. It just looked a bit plain, a bit boring with just so much metal. So you actually see later, I paint over most of it. You know, if I had the time again, I would, yeah, I would plan it out better. By this time the boots are now dry and I'm looking to do some highlights on some of these raised areas. Now the obvious choice is grey. I don't have any grey paint, so I could make some by mixing up black and white, but yeah, I decided to mix in some of this Cantor blue, which creates quite a dark grey with like a bluish tint. Um, which I think works quite nicely. It's quite thin, so I just glaze it over on a few layers, to create some variation in the colour, provide a bit of definition and some interest. So yeah, I think it's a good start, and we'll add something else to it to create the contrast. But yeah, while that's drying, I'll go back to the metal and add some Nuln Oil. Now, we've already established, I've already figured out my area by this stage, and deciding to paint the team colours. So I'm not going to paint the Nuln Oil all over, and just, stick to the areas of metal that I think are going to be visible. So effectively around the edges, just create depth in these recesses on the edge here. Next, we move on to the tunic, and I'm going to start with this Vallejo German camo beige. Now, there's a few ways to paint white, one of them being undercoat of grey, followed by highlight with white or a lighter grey, and that gives the depth to the recesses. Now, we've already established I don't have any grey paint, so we can't be using that. Also, using grey or light blue can give a cold white, whereas I want a kind of warm white for the cloth. So yeah, I think camo beige will work great. So once that's dry, I use some Citadel Corex white to dry brush and hit the raised areas. You can see if I'd have painted the skin, then dry brushing this white would have messed things up a bit. So yeah, I don't know, I just thought it was good to do this first. So the skin will do a base coat of Cadian flesh tone, followed by a wash of Reichland flesh shade. Layer back the Cadian flesh tone and highlight with Citadel Kislev flesh. Yeah, it's a basic GW recipe. I think I got it from Elfish Blood Bowl team, so not specifically ogreish, but I do want a light coloured skin on the ogre, and yeah, they're paints that I own, so the ones I'm working with. Next, I'll do a base of Citadel Rhinox hide on the leather detail. At this stage, I'm just looking to get good coverage, and then we'll come back later and layer up with variations in colour. It's a technique I'm going to try and copy from a Scottish artist I like, a guy called Cudjoe. He does the most amazing highlights on hair as well, so we'll definitely be trying that one as well. Speaking of hair, we want it to be a focal point, we want it to be bright, um, but I'm going to start off with a darkish colour and build it up from there. So starting with Citadel Bugman's Glow for the base. Once the skin's dry, we can then wash the skin with Reichland Flesh Shade. The idea is that this runs into the recesses, creating darker areas in the shadows, and then you build up the light um, back up with the Cadian Flesh Tone to tidy and leave the recesses dark. While I'm on it, I'll also shade the hair. To be honest, at this stage, it's a bit of a mess. I did try and keep the Reichland Flesh shade moving, not to let it pool too much, but I think I might have gone a bit overboard with the wash. Anyway, the next step is going to be my chance to tidy things back up a bit. When I originally primed the model, I first primed the model grey. Once it was dry, I hit it with a spray of white from above and took some pics on my phone. The idea behind that is that the white highlights the raised areas, and taking a picture gives you that reference that you can keep looking back at to get an idea of the light. So using this as a reference, I can start to layer back up. First of all, tidying it up a bit with some Cadian Flesh Tone. Places like the face, the abs, where there's lots of detail, I found those the easiest parts, as you can just hit the raised edges. Some of the larger muscle groups, I found the transition quite stark to begin with, and actually watered down some of the flesh tone to a glaze consistency. It was in order to try and blend that transition. I was kind of happy with it in the end. So, when I moved on to the next highlight of Kislev Flesh, I decided to carry on in that way. So, added some Vallejo glaze medium to thin the paint down. Wasn't quite sure of the exact consistency to start with. I knew I was going to add it gradually and build up that highlight, but I didn't want it too runny so as to lose control. Um, I think I managed to get a nice level in the end, and then basically worked my way around the model, picking out the raised areas, tops of the muscles, the parts from the photo which were the lightest. I'm trying to do it gradually so that it blends in, but also layer up so there's a gradient of a highlight with just the smallest parts, the tops of the muscles, being the brightest. As a first attempt, I was really quite pleased with the result. I think things are definitely coming together. The skin done and the rest of the base coats all in place, it's starting to take shape. Next step is to layer up the leather. I'm going to start mixing in some Citadel Bugman's Glow to the Rhinox hide. It's a technique I'm going to copy off Cudjoe, layering up using lots of little lines to try and create the texture. When you look real close, you can see the variation in the colour, which I like, but it doesn't quite pop in the way that I want. So to try and get that, I'm going to edge highlight with some German camo beige. It's a much lighter colour than obviously the darker brown, so it offers quite a bit of contrast, and I think it really makes a difference. So anyway, that brings us to the end of part one. I hope you'll join me in part two, where we'll finish off the touches. A lot of the finishing touches will really make the mini, but that's where I'm going to do the focal point, which is the hair and the team colours, etc. Thanks for now.